Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependent Dummy podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. Now, in your 20s, you're finding yourself exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in shit relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. Codependency is a way of being where we put the feelings, wants, and needs of others above our own in an unconscious attempt to meet our own feelings, wants, and needs. Sorry to break it to you, sis, but that is not sustainable. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Codependent Dummy podcast. Today, I'm sitting with Monica Helvie. Monica is a USC master graduate and a licensed marriage and family therapist and trauma coach for audacious, overworked, and burnt out therapists. She helps her clients find their inner badass again with insight and connection. She uses trauma-informed, body-based interventions to help healers break through their burnout and achieve authentic alignment with their best self. Monica, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so fun.
So fun. You're like my bio. That was great.
I love these things. This is fun to connect.
Yeah. So first things first, I'm curious, how do you define codependency?
Yeah. So codependency in my conceptualization is when an individual has learned that it's safer or in some way better to over-attune to the needs, wants, or emotions of others and neglect their own wants and needs. So much so that they end up developing this pattern of self-neglect.
Right.
So sometimes the story is, I'm not okay if you're not okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Say more about learned, right? I think I've heard tons of definitions, but that there's been this, it's when an individual engages or relates to others seeking safety by attuning to the needs, but that learned piece. Say more about that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that it's necessarily like an explicit lesson that's been taught so much as it's more of an implicit experience, right? They in some ways receive conditioning or they're modeled that it is better or safer. They get their needs met indirectly, right? By over attuning to that of most oftentimes it's their caregivers, when they're first learning those lessons.
Right. So it's not okay, little Marissa, today we're going to learn how to create safety by being very observant of the adults around you and guessing what they need, and then you'll feel safe. But right, unintentionally, implicitly, unknowingly, as children, we did receive these messages, and it's like the school of life.
Yep.
And
that's honestly, experience is the best teacher, right? And so through those experiences, it shapes our understanding of how we need to show up in the world.
Right. And that's the conclusions we came to. And some people obviously come to other conclusions, like, oh, I'll just get my needs met, screw everyone. Or, oh, there's a balance, or let me assert my needs. But codependence, you really sense this learned pattern where it's safer to attune to the needs of others.
Yeah. Yes. And I want to add, like, the individual will often have guilt and shame even about prioritizing or asserting their needs. Again, that's what they have learned, or um, that's what they experienced when they asserted their needs more directly, is
Right.
that they were guilted or shamed for bringing those to the relationship at the time, right? So so they really start to receive messaging and conditioning that their worth, their value, their importance, their ability to show up is really contingent first on them denying their own needs and prioritizing the needs of those around them first.
Mm. Can you give an example?
Well, of course. I think that therapists, we learn very early on in our childhood that, like, how to be in that caretaker role, how to be in that accommodating role, right? And so there are, it's very common for therapists to run into that, and so I'm no different than that. And so I don't necessarily know that it was, again, a direct message so much as it's how I internally made meaning of that interaction.
Right.
Right. So it's like, if I asserted my needs and my parent was dysregulated and they just didn't have the capacity for it, right? And they're like, oh, what? You need what? You need what for school? Huh? Right? Even if it's just something as it doesn't have to be an overt trauma, right? A traumatic statement or an overtly negligent comment. It's just a misattunement, right? But in that misattunement, I make a meaning of, oh, I've overwhelmed them and I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't bring that need.
Right.
Maybe not now, or maybe not ever. Maybe it's not ever safe.
Can you say more about misattunement?
Yeah. Well, I think what's um, I think what's hard for some folks to understand is that we can't ever get it right 100% of the time. So I don't want people to walk away from this definition as, like, again, feeling more guilt or shame about their experiences. I just want them to understand, like, we are all operating to the best of our ability, and we also have to prioritize our own survival, right? And so caregivers will sometimes misattune to the needs of their child because they have other things that are happening that they have to attune to. They have to attune to their work. They have to attune to, the bills of the household, or the operations that keep the house running. So it's not necessarily an overt neglect situation in some cases. Sometimes it's just that it's impossible as a parent or caregiver to be 100% attuned to your child 100% of the time.
Right.
Right. And so that when those misses happen, what oftentimes happens in the experience of the child is they make a meaning about it that's actually more favorable to the caregiver, and sort of they internalize sometimes their own role or responsibility. They take blame, right? It's my
Right.
fault, I shouldn't have, right? As opposed to, my mom's stressed out because of work. They will give the parent the favor and say they were right to misattune to me, I'm too much, right? Or some version of that.
Right. And how do you sense that is a, despite how inaccurate that conclusion is, like how self-preserving it can be to believe that?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. For the child to take the responsibility, or if they take the blame in that case, right, I can do something about that. Right. If I'm a burden, or if I'm too much, or if I'm responsible, I can fix that. Right.
Mm.
If if my parent is consistently unavailable for me emotionally, I can't fix that.
Right.
So that's a harder reality to wrestle with. And so the story of it's on me or it's my fault is, again, a survival story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're reminding me. I think I've talked about this, everyone, so I apologize if this is repetitive, but I was a cheerleader in seventh and eighth. I mean, I was a cheerleader a couple years, but in seventh and eighth grade, we competed and we had to have a certain hairstyle. And yeah, like a tight bun. And then we had to put all these curlers in our hair, a whole can of hairspray, pull it out. And we had the bounciest, most beautiful curls.
Little spirals. Yeah.
Little spirals. And I remember, approaching my mom and saying, Mom, there's this hairstyle. And despite her being way older, she knew exactly what I was talking about, because I think it's just been the same hairstyle for decades. And she did it. She did such a good job at it because she's good at like crafts and projects and details.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that my friends wanted her to do their hair. And I remember at times, given her stresses with work, I'm a twin, she's dealing with my twin sister. I have an older sister. My mom's married. She has to take care. And I remember I would approach her the night before a competition, like, Mom, I need you to do my hair. And she's like, ugh, not like that, but just in a way she would convey, oh,
exasperation. Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, there's nothing else she can do for that hour. She's literally, her hands are occupied. Maybe we'll have a show on, but it was a demanding task.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think for my survival, I'd had like, I'm a burden. I'm inconveniencing her.
Yeah.
I'm a burden really comes up. And yeah, if it's all about her, I'm just stuck. What do I do with that?
Yeah.
If I'm just like, oh, my mom's stressed, there's no agency there.
No. Yeah. And for a child, again, that vulnerability that imposes on them, right? I'm helpless to fix this, is so much more vulnerable than I'm the problem and I can fix that.
Yeah. Right? I'll ask Mom ahead of time. I'll create a calendar.
I'll pick the perfect time to ask
put on a good movie.
Make this as easy for her as possible.
Yeah. But again, all of that activity, like you said, like there is this shift, this lesson that let me attune to the needs of others to feel safe. But then, yeah, where am I in that?
Right. You're so attuned to her potential for dysregulation that you're not even paying any attention to your own dysregulation.
Right.
Over asking and, constructing this wonderfully connecting, safe experience for your mom.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And then going back to what you're saying, Monica, I know the psychotherapy field has condemned the behaviors that my mom had in that interaction, right? Like, oh, how neglectful, insensitive. Here's this poor innocent girl asking for her hair.
Yeah.
And yet misattunement.
Yeah. Well, in that moment, again, even the right? Like her reaction is really a release of her own dysregulation, her own stress, right? That vocalization, that that heavy sigh, whatever comes with that, that is her nervous system's attempt to prioritize her own survival, reset, recalibrate, right? She's recognizing, oh, I don't have the bandwidth, whatever's happening in that moment, right? Her reaction is really coming from her own thing,
Right.
her own needs.
Right.
And what happens again in those moments is, as a child, you recognize she doesn't know how to regulate her dysregulation, right? She's, right? Let me do it. I'll do that, right? Like, it's this effort to, I'm not okay if you're not okay, so let me make this okay for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't blame her now.
No.
Right.
No.
I think, again, the literature would have me blame, some of the literature would have me blame her.
Yeah.
And also, you did preface this with, I hope by discussing misattunement, I don't cause anyone to blame themselves further.
Right.
So, yeah, your thoughts on how I hold that awareness and also not condemn myself for feeling worse.
Well, again, we have to put it in the context of, this is about a survival, right? This isn't this misattunement that can happen, or even the actions or the behaviors of accommodating others, or people pleasing, or codependency, like whatever term you want to use for that. All of that is coming from an internal perception of, this is what I have to do to survive.
Right.
And when we don't have internal awareness of that, we can go to a place of shame or blame or lack of compassion. It's very easy to get frustrated or lash out. But really, once we understand, like, this is how I've learned to survive, right? If this is how I release stress, I need to do this now. It's not a choice, right? It's this unconscious pattern of, this is imperative.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so the shame isn't necessarily going to help you change that pattern, right? And so what's going to help you change that pattern is developing that awareness and giving yourself that safety, so that you can make different choices in how you're showing up.
Right.
Or make the repairs. Oh,
Right.
honey, I'm so sorry. I've got a lot going on, right? Or whatever, so that she could take responsibility and say, you know what? You're not responsible for this. I am.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I love connecting with you. I'm just tired, right? So that you don't write your own meaning, but she's really has her own awareness and can regulate herself, right? That's what really I want people to realize, is like, you can learn how to do that. Right? That, just like you learned how to over attune to others, you can learn how to tune into yourself and give yourself the things that you need, resource yourself accordingly, and show up differently.
Mm-hmm. Right. Also, building on that, right? I'm hearing how my mom can repair it,
Yes.
but yeah, given I approach her, she has a response. I take full responsibility and ownership for that response. I grow up and recognize her response was not personal.
Mm-hmm.
It was misattunement.
Yes.
I do my utmost to not feel shameful for developing a pattern where I did attune to her and I do attune to others. And yeah, being aware that most of my codependency, I would argue, comes from misattunement, not intentional, malicious,
Right.
like, interactions. you said, it's about developing awareness, safety. So when I do approach someone with a need, and that part of me is like, oh God, it is going to be burdensome. It is going to be a big ask. It is too much, recognizing that part of me and almost planning for a misattunement. There might be go ahead.
And updating, right? Like updating, yeah, that happened then, right? Like that misattunement used to happen. That used to be a thing we had to expect, plan for, be afraid of, worried about. And also, maybe that's not true here, right? We're using this template that we needed to survive in our family of origin, but is that needed in my relationship with my partner, who is more emotionally spacious or who is more, able to connect over these things, right? So sometimes we need to sort of update our internal narrative,
right?
And say, yes, thank you for keeping me alive. That's what I had to do to show up and get connection or feel loved or valued or important there. I don't need to do that so much anymore, right? Like rewriting that narrative, that inner dialogue.
Right. So rewriting the dialogue and also planning on misattunement, but in I don't know, it's just because it's not gonna happen, but I also don't think, I guess, so updating the narrative and also updating the conclusion we come to if there is a misattunement, right?
Yeah.
Like if I do ask someone and they're like, oh, I'll be like, they must be stressed out.
Yeah.
I will ask someone else. And that be
yes. Well, and what you're addressing in that, okay, I can take this ask somewhere else, is you're recognizing their exasperation does not have anything to do with your survival. Right? Because again, our early learning was that if my caregiver doesn't attune to me, if I'm too much for them, are they going to reject me? Are they going to cast me out? Are they, right? Am I not going to ever get my needs met? Will they go away? Right? We have all these stories that are contingent on our survival. But as an adult, it's like, I can ask somebody else, right? I can maybe meet this need for myself. I might be more independent than I was at 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? When I started telling myself this was about survival, I have to be small for survival. I have to take up less space for survival. Is it have anything to do with my survival now? Probably not.
Probably not, everybody. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
And my mom's listening. So Mom,
we love you. It's
we
okay.
Misattunement, an example. And developing the safety, awareness, repairs, if and when needed as adults.
Yeah. And none of us can get it right 100% of the time. Like we really can't.
You emphasized we earlier. We as in you have children and you're like, I represent all the parents.
Yes. And also as humans, it would be impossible for us to be attuned again to our own self, which is all we're responsible for, to be 100% attuned to ourselves and to the needs of everyone else around us. It would be impossible, right? So hey, humans, we can't do it 100% of the time. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
So we did touch on an example from your own life. I'm curious, do you have a more specific codependent experience or relationship that you can share with us?
Yeah. Well, I think one that might be relatable for, even other therapists, or maybe high achievers, the audacious listeners in your audience. But for me, over attuning with my parents it didn't stop there, right? Like we bring ourselves everywhere we go. And so our brain is somewhat lazy and wants to apply what worked then and there. It wants to take that template and apply it everywhere. Mm-hmm. So I carried that over-attuning, that people-pleasing, that high achieving with me through school, into early on in my career, into community mental health, and even into my private practice for a bit, right? And many people don't realize that it, again, this doesn't always have to look like being really vulnerable or very small. It can sometimes look like the fixer, right? The hero, right?
Right.
So sometimes this pattern can look really like competent or capable. And in some ways that was useful to me throughout school and throughout my career. But it developed this really unhealthy dynamic where I sort of had to, light myself on fire to keep the, DMH, the machine running, the community mental health machine running, right? Where I can fix it, or I can take that on, or yeah, sure, I'll add that to my schedule. This person's out sick, I'll see their people, right? Where again, there's this over attunement or this hyper awareness of the needs around me, and a belief that, again, it's my job, it's my role to fill that. And in some ways it meets the needs of the clinic. It gets rewarded and reinforced with, the bonuses or the pay raises or the additional job roles. And then the unconscious needs of validation or importance or self-worth or belonging, all of those get met, but it comes at such a high cost to the individual. And it came at a really high cost for me in the sense that I was like, how can I get out of this field? Like, could I just push some buttons at targets and that be my job now? Right? Like I was ready to leave. And where I sit today on the other side of that burnout and sort of that crash is like, if I had stopped doing this work then, none of these people would have received the work that we've done, the transformation that they've had in their lives. And to me, that's like so sad to imagine. Right? And therapists are leaving the field at like record amounts right now. Like the burnout in healthcare in general is through the roof. And so, yeah, that was my experience.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear more about the thought, like, oh, if I had left, the transformations that would not have happened.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I don't know that they would have never happened, right? Or that they couldn't have happened in a different way. But I think that in some ways we grow as an individual also when our clients grow. And so just even my own growth could have been stunted, right? In that sense too. Yeah, it truly, it's heartbreaking to think about. I know so many colleagues and coworkers who have remained in toxic dynamics like that, where they are contorting themselves to fit into the model of what a clinician should be in those agencies. They're trying so hard to fit into those boxes. And the more that they do that, they really are departing or disconnecting even more from themselves. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking for them to see the discontentment and the burnout. And there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of guilt and shame for people who are in that place, right? Like, I'm a therapist, I should know better. Why am I, so lax on my boundaries? Why am I not taking care of myself? Like, I know how to, right? Like, there can be a lot of this guilt and shame,
Right.
that can come up for them.
Mm-hmm. I want to highlight, Monica, it is heartbreaking and it is sad. And also, it's heartbreaking and sad to you specifically and thankfully, which is why you have your niche. Like, I know it and I'm like, eh. Like, it's sad, but that's
Yeah.
not, yeah, I just continue being a therapist, but here you are, like, reading the statistics, learning about it, and you have this pull to help.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a personal connection there, right? Like, I've been there. Right. And so I think sometimes when we are finding our niche or our passion, it's really like we're sort of come with us. Like, I've just kind of departed that space myself. So, like, come with me, there's light on the other side, right? And so I think that it can, the passion can kind of come from that place. But I think, again, in general, when we think about the work of a clinician and the people that they're helping and trying to service, if they don't do this work, what's that going to look like for my children? Like, what communities, who are going to be their influencers and teachers if there's not this resolution, right? And so I think that there is some sense of this is how I can help, right? This is how I can help is I have done this for myself, and it's sort of a come with me, right? Whereas maybe early on in my own, over-attuning or people pleasing, it's like, let me fix you. It's not coming from that place. It's coming from the, hey, yeah, I see you. And it doesn't have to stay that way.
No. Yeah. So you've mentioned contorting, guilt, shame.
Yeah.
What else does codependency look like in audacious, heroic, overworked, burnt out therapists?
Well, again, I think that it has similar qualities to it. But oftentimes, those who are presenting more audacious or more, I want to say resilient, right? They're presenting they're projecting really resilient.
Right.
They're projecting hyper independence. But internally, they have a lot of self doubt and some insecurity there because they sense their own internal disconnect. Right. So a lot of these folks will say, like, I feel like an imposter. Right. People see me as one way, but internally I feel like, meh, right. And so there's that disconnection. And so because of that disconnection, there could be some internal, like, is it really bad for me? I don't know. Like, that questioning, that self-doubt, and that insecurity.
I am hearing my experience professionally, your observations on codependency in these heroic, fixing, competent, burnt out therapists in their personal lives.
Yeah. Yeah. There, again, we take ourselves everywhere we go. So, of course, it's going to show up in their personal life, that disconnection. Right. And I also want to say, like, isolation. Right. Like they can feel frustrated, but also so unseen with those misattunements. And so, again, being unseen or feeling isolated, that's going to activate the nervous system's threat response. And there's only a few ways we can respond to that, right? We might fight, we might flight, or we might just freeze, right? Or fawn, right? But the crowd that I tend to work with, they might show up more in the fight or flight. Okay, so in this case, it would look like the fight might look like that they're reactive when they get home. They're irritated, they're touched out, they're overstimulated, right? It's like, ugh, no, thank you. I don't want connection, but really they do crave that authentic, deep connection. But they're so misaligned internally that they can't even have the spaciousness for it anymore. Right? The flight might look like they just, hermit up, right? Like, no, thank you, not going to anything. I'm staying home. I again, touched out, don't want to be around anybody. Like, I'm out. Or it might be like the endless scrolling, right? The dissociative Netflix, right? Just gonna binge watch Netflix. Or shop the aisles of Target, right? Like that can be a form of flight. But again, it's coming from this place of like, there's such a misalignment, a misattunement internally, right? That the system internally senses like, you're not with me. You're not listening to me. You're not taking care of me. You're neglecting me.
Yeah. I remember we would go to outings and I would think to myself, are we a group of therapists or alcoholics?
Right. Well, I mean, if you check the back of the Camps magazine, it is certainly one of the main, a big portion of the infractions that clinicians run up against is DUIs. And again, it's like the red flags are everywhere. Our population is suffering with this.
Yeah.
Right? They've been misattuned to, unseen throughout childhood. They sit in the therapy chair and they attune to the others very well. They're proficient in this. And then they leave home and they don't know how to tune in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Oh, the most tragic, right? I'm hearing professionally what it looks like, personally, internally, even, right? Feeling like an imposter. Any other thoughts on what codependency looks like with the therapists you work with?
Well, like I said, I think all of that leads to the burnout, right? So that's another way it's going to show up is just exhaustion. And I'm not talking like like medium toasty burnt out. Like it's like call the fire department. Like it is burning down the house, burnt out. Like they've got nothing left. Right. And that's really that dorsal, that collapse, that freeze response. Right. And so it's like this overworking, this over functioning, this over attuning, right? This more, this pressure, expectation. That living in that chronic stress for so long absolutely leads to collapse. And that can look like chronic illness. That could look like insomnia. That could look like so many different things, but ultimately it all fits under the umbrella of burnout. Right. Again, the body says no, right?
Yeah. And hopefully they crawl metaphorically to your doorstep.
And the smoke signal.
You take a fire extinguisher.
Mm-hmm.
What are your initial steps in approaching these codependent traits with your clients?
Yeah. Well, again, particularly therapists, people in general, but particularly therapists have a deep craving for connection and authenticity. And when we're not giving it to ourselves, we're not able to give it to anyone. So we got to learn how to do that for ourselves, right? We've got to learn how to connect with ourselves and authentically connect with ourselves, being really honest with ourselves. And we got to stop settling for discontentment and burnout. I mean, I know there's a lot of therapists that follow those like therapy meme pages and humor pages. And like, it is the most running joke that we suck at self-care. We just suck at taking care of ourselves. And it's like, why are we just settling for that being the thing? We have to start expecting more for ourselves.
Really quick
Right?
to interrupt.
Yeah.
What meme stands out to you?
Well, I just saw one this week. And so it was like, you know, that meme of the guy holding the girl's hand and he's walking with her and he turns around and there's another girl in the forefront. Okay. So it was like social workers and therapists was the guy with the girl, and the girl he's holding hands with says self-care, I think. And then he's turning back and looking at a coffee Starbucks.
Mm.
Right. So the implication is like, nah, I don't want to be with self-care. I want to go get a coffee. Right.
Ha
Like,
ha 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 ha.
it's hilarious. But like literally we do it all the time.
Right.
Right. I don't need therapy. I need a vacation. Right. But meanwhile, we can't even settle into enjoy ourselves on our vacation because we can't connect with ourselves. So we're working, we're checking emails, we're drinking, we're doing all the things that aren't actual restorative nervous system self-care.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, you know, as much as it's about learning some new practical tools, it's also got to start with that radical responsibility for the reality of the situation. Like, hey, I'm really disconnected and I do value connection. So like, I'm out of alignment here. Right. So
Say
we've
more
got to be
about
honest with ourselves.
what's radical responsibility mean to you in your work?
Well, I think that we can sometimes be like passively responsible. Like, okay, I need self-care. I'll go get my nails done. Right. And I'm talking like, no, we have to be like, this has to be serious, like radical, like it has to be all in responsibility, right? Because it is nobody else's job to heal your nervous system.
Mm.
Right? Like we have to be the ones to do this for us first if we're going to do it for anyone. If we're going to teach this to anyone, we've got to know it. We've got to feel it. We got to sense it. The connection, the alignment, the authenticity, the self-care, the self-nurturing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We can't teach our clients about, empowerment and speaking your truth and like all these great, wonderful things. And like internally, we're like, I don't speak my truth, right? I don't ask for what I need, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it can show up in so many different ways. But like I said, I think it really does have to start with taking an honest look at what do I value and where am I really at.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think we have to get to know ourselves. Like we really have to lean in and ask ourselves, what do I want for me? How do I want to be showing up? Right? How do I want to be connecting with others? what makes me feel safe? What are my needs? What are my wants? Those kinds of questions. We really have to get to know ourselves, because with this over attunement to others, we've lost that information. We've not asked ourselves those questions since we were very young. So we have to explore that. And here's the thing. It requires us to be in safe connection with others. Because this misattunement, this rupture, this wound, it happened in attachment, it happened in connection. The way we heal it is in connection. It's in relationship, right? So I am all for DIY. Okay, I love me a good DIY, but this isn't the thing you want to DIY.
I'm curious for the listener, for the therapist, right? Therapist, heal thyself. What have you experienced yourself or with your clients? What are the consequences of attempting this DIY?
Well, I think it actually reinforces the message of like internal pressure, right? It's on me, all me, right? I have to be the one. And with my audacious achievers, like, that is such a place that feeds that unconscious like need for importance, or need to protect the shame, or there's just so much unconscious needs met in that. And so it really does limit the full potential of the transformation, because it's like, when you go into those like dressing rooms, the nicer ones that have like the three-way view, right? When you're only looking at something from one angle, you're like, yeah, sure, that looks fine. And then you peep it from the rear and you're like, oh yeah, no, those pants aren't going to work on my butt, right? That's why we need this kind of healing connection, a safe connection, where we can just slightly see a different angle of ourselves. And we can sort of break up with that narrative, that it has to be on me. It's always me. I'm the one. I'm the fixer.
Mm-hmm. And I would expand that to the healing of codependency, dear listener, whether you're a therapist or not. It's the irony of healing that these patterns came from our relationships. Codependence, we define ourselves through these relationships in an unhealthy manner. We'd hope to heal all by ourselves. But yeah, there's just this demand for like a middle ground where healthy relationships help us develop healthy patterns. But it is dependent on others.
Yeah, it's like the very thing we don't trust is the very thing we need. The very thing that hasn't been safe for us is the very thing we need.
Yeah. So for the therapist who is listening, who is interested, right? I'm asking, like, how do you help your clients? You're like, radical responsibility, getting in touch with values, where am I at? And all these questions for introspection and connection.
Yeah, in safe connection. Yeah.
So that
they can start trusting themselves and knowing themselves and learning how to be with themselves, right? And not necessarily with just, again, over attunement to the other, but like actually being with themselves. So the ways that I work with them to develop that internal safety is really, I come from a body-based perspective. So we're doing some somatic interventions, some EMDR interventions, but we're really going bottom up, right? Because so much of the time when we've learned these patterns in early childhood, we've been repeating them at a very unconscious level, right? And so our body perceives things first. That information comes into the body's awareness. It shoots up into the brain. The brain makes a meaning, tells the story. It has the thought, and then it sends the feeling, right? but it comes that there's a perception in the environment, right? You can sit down, at a coffee shop, and your body will feel safe or unsafe. It will know, like, the energy is high here, like there's a lot of people, there's a lot of chatter, and that will start to either dysregulate you or soothe you. So there's a lot that happens unconsciously with the body. But again, with somebody who struggles with people pleasing or codependency, they've disconnected from those internal alarms.
Right.
They don't sense when they're uncomfortable. They sense when others are uncomfortable.
Right.
Right. So the internal process of coming back in, reconnecting with themselves, building that internal safety, learning the tools to resource themselves. So again, if I go to assert my needs and I'm feeling my body get sweaty over having to ask for something, because my story is they're going to say no, or they're going to be exasperated, right? I sense that dysregulation. I can honor it. I know where that comes from. I know what that's about. There's a younger part of me that remembered how it went, in my childhood. And hey, girl, it's okay. This isn't the same situation, right? And this isn't about survival anymore. I have internal connection. I have internal belonging. I have internal awareness of my worth and my importance. I don't need others to choose me. I'm choosing me. Right. And so I'll do some of that body work with them, and I do some parts work. I do some internal family systems or inner child work, and we sort of go to those younger parts and those stories, and we work to somatically unburden those experiences, so that as they walk forward into new experiences, they can update that narrative. They can say to themselves and feel it, not just in their head, like, I know this isn't my mom, but we're actually believing, like, it's safe now to ask. If the worst they say is no, and guess what? I can go somewhere else and get this need met. It's going to be okay. Right. Having that body sense of, like, yeah, I'm safe.
Right. And the connection piece?
Well, the connection piece is here, right? It's between me and them, and I do really encourage group healing, because again, when you can experience a group that is holding safety and space for you to show up and be seen and be heard, it's a disconfirming experience. And so the body heals at a way deeper level, because now we learn it's not just Monica, my therapist, that's safe. I have felt safety with 5 people, right? And so that healing really settles into the body and generalizes. It's a deeper healing that's afforded to them. So that's where that connection piece, right? Connection externally, but also that connection internally with knowing themselves, sensing themselves, resourcing themselves.
Yeah. Okay, last question. Yeah. What do you mean disconfirming experience?
Well, so again, our brain is constantly scanning for the evidence that our biases are true, right? So if I need to believe that it's not safe for me to ask my needs, like I learned that in childhood, that's my template, that's my belief. I'm constantly scanning for, you see, it wasn't safe then, that person was also annoyed. Or you see, it wasn't safe then, the teacher yelled at me because it wasn't time to use the restroom, whatever, right? We're constantly gathering evidence to confirm our biases. And so when we have a disconfirming experience, it's supporting the new narrative that we're trying to write, right? It's disproving that original narrative.
Right. It's updating the narrative.
Exactly. Exactly.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's so
Monica,
cool to watch people go through that.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing the work and how meaningful it is for you. If people are resonating or interested to find out more, what are you offering our listeners?
Yeah, so I've shared with you a link for my free core wounds workbook. It's basically a quick guided exercise. Like, this would be like a snapshot of an exercise that we might do together. And it's going to help you to really identify maybe where some of those narratives are, where some of those beliefs might live. And ideally, you take that again, I don't want you to DIY the whole thing, right? But I want you to take this awareness and then take it to your therapy or take it into a safe connection and like explore it further in connection with others, right? If it's not with me, with your own therapist, a coach or whoever you're working with, to really identify areas where you can update that narrative.
And
So,
if
you have to look
people,
for that.
thank you, are interested in working with you, where can they find you?
Yes. So you can get me on my website, which is just my name. It's monicahelvie.com. If you are a therapist, I have a specific page for you. If you want to do this work in connection with me and with a group of safe others, I have a wait list that's forming on that link there on that page. Or if you want to do one-to-one work and you're in California and Texas, you can go to the contact page and select that you want to do one-to-one work with me, and I'll get you set up with a consultation.
Awesome. All right. Yes. Well, I'll put links to all of that, everyone, in the show notes.
Yes.
And our takeaways are to focus on connection and awareness.
Yeah. And building up that internal safety. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Okay. Bye.
Hey, girl. It's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster. I'm a cool podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end. You can find me on Instagram at Therapy with Marissa. Email me, marissa@codependummy.com. Check out codependummy.com for more information on the show. And baby girl, a subscribe, rating, and review would be much appreciated. Till next time, I want you to remember, if you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you think that you don't matter, know that you matter to me. I want you to go out there so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. And now, the disclaimer. Girl, this is not therapy and I am not your therapist. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, or guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional service. If you want or need a professional, please